And, well, I'm just going to get started, all right? And just so you know, and I'll explain why in a bit, all of the images that you see, and this was a last-minute decision on my part, but all of the images that you see throughout are from most of them anyway, are from a trip to Italy that I did about a year and a half ago now. And so this first image is the spires at the top of the Duomo in Milan, because you can actually climb to the top of it and go out on the roof. So that's the spires looking down. And I thought it was a really appropriate image for which one doesn't belong. Because can you really pick out, is there one of them that doesn't belong in that picture? And hopefully by the end, this will make a little more sense as to why that's the picture I chose to start with. So, anybody ever not worn one of these stupid little things, right? I hate these, right? But the reason I started with it is part of the reason that John even talked to me in the beginning. So I typically meet people and I say, hi, yep, I'm Michelle Yaiser, nice to meet you. And what follows next? What do you do? And I have to go through this little algorithm in my head of how much energy do I have, how many people do I need to talk to, am I in a good mood, am I in a bad mood, and am I willing to entertain dumb questions? Because this isn't an easy answer for me, in general. The easy answer is I work for Adobe. Okay? But the more complicated answer is that, well, I work for Adobe, I work with education stuff. Prior to that, I was a college professor and a freelance web developer. I'm also a licensed race car driver, a classically trained clarinetist, a dancer, a borderline foodie. I have friends that tell me since I don't eat sushi that I can't consider myself a true foodie because that's one category apparently you have to love. And I used to do a lot of physical computing, so all the little tinkering and soldering with the makes and the Arduinos and everything like that. So people kind of look at me and they're like, oh, what'd you do school for? It's like, well, that's a long story too. And so in the beginning of this talk, okay, so this is also the Duomo, so this is the front of the church that you saw the spire close-up before. So in the beginning, there's John. And John approached me, I guess it was, October, and he's like, so I got this idea for this conference. I know so many tech people who do all of these other things in their lives, but find a way to make it work. And find a way that their passion of one area influences their passion of another area. And I think you'd be great. And I was like, wow, thanks. Actually, I'm really flattered. What do you want me to talk about? He's like, well, talk about yourself and, of course, talk about racing. And I thought, oh, awesome, great. I get to stand up on stage and talk about myself for 45 minutes. And then I had the thought, crap, that's going to be really boring for everybody else. So I was really trying to figure out what to talk about. And I've been writing this presentation in my head since almost the day John asked me. Typically, most of my thoughts about it were in the shower in the morning. That's like my free thinking time that I'm not quite awake yet, I haven't had enough coffee yet, and I just kind of let my mind wander, and it's like starting to sort through the day. Sometimes I've looked at my email, sometimes I haven't. I've been trying, kind of like Kirby earlier, I've been trying not to do it as much, as that's not the first thing that I do in the morning. And so this is where a lot of my ideas for what I wanted to talk about today came from. And I would get out of the shower and I'd jot something down. So I had all kinds of sticky notes and old business cards, because old business cards, by the way, the ones that are blank on the back, are fantastic note cards after the fact. So I had this whole stack that I've been putting through, and so then I just started making a slide for each one if I had a few extra minutes. So this presentation, if anybody saw it on Twitter the other day, this presentation had like 200 slides, just text at one point. And I debated about where this was going to go. And I finally decided this morning to keep this in, because last week really changed a lot of people's lives. Right? So I live in Boston. I do actually live on the marathon route. I'm about how they run, not quite 4 miles from the finish line. And I do live in Alston-Brighton neighborhood, which is the neighborhood that directly touches Watertown. So at 5:45 last Friday morning, we got a reverse 911 call to wake us up to tell us that there is an armed and dangerous criminal on the loose after a high-speed chase and a gunfight in the streets. Please stay locked indoors all day until further notice. And that's how my last Friday started. And it was really interesting. When the bombings happened last Monday, the number of people I know outside of Boston that were pinging me every way possible. Twitter, DMs, public tweets, Facebook, IMs, texts, phone calls to find out. They knew I lived on the marathon route. They wanted to know, had I been at the marathon? Was I okay? Was everybody else I knew okay? And of course, that was how I found out it happened, because I was actually in the office. It's a holiday for the state, but businesses who are centered outside of the state are open. So Adobe offices out in Waltham were open. So I was actually in the office. And so none of us had heard anything about it. Obviously, we all jumped online and were watching the live streams. So I found out about it from all the people I'm connected to. And as the week went on, regardless of what the external media was saying, especially Friday, what really pissed off Boston was the number of media that said, oh, Boston was paralyzed by these bombers in the chase because we were all locked inside. And actually, all the people that I've talked to, and I actually have friends that live 2 blocks from the boat where they caught him, who had repeatedly through the day, armed cops at their door searching. We were staying out of the way. We wanted the cops to catch this guy. We knew we would be in the way. We knew we would make the police worry about somebody innocent getting, hurt in the crossfire or something. We were happy to stay out of the way. And as eerie as it was to be in the city with no traffic, no public transportation, no pedestrians. I mean, kind of the running joke, last Friday would have been a great day to shoot a post-apocalyptic zombie movie in downtown Boston because there was nothing on the streets. It was a good thing for us. And throughout the week, in a sense, it's been a real sense of community. And so in thinking about this, it kind of changed the way I thought about some of the things I was going to say. So I hope that that is okay with everybody, that it kind of got filtered, that it's not just which one doesn't belong, but hopefully by the end, you're going to see that they all belong, and everything is about the connections that you make. Because those are the most important things. Whatever the connections are for you, those are the most important things. So let me pause this. Oh, I forgot to plug in my the headphone jack. Sorry. Let me go back.
Right, here you go. 2 giraffes playing Twister from opposite directions.
This is my life. I go to get coffee, my wife is into street performance.
Oh, it's going in your bread.
Thanks for the break. Back to you.
No problem. You know what really hurt? Nude rodeo.
Where did that come from?
Clown, rodeo drive, fancy clothes, no clothes, nude rodeo.
Yes, that would.
So that, 15 seconds of video explains my brain 90% of the time. When I first saw this, and the beauty of torrent years later, when I had first saw this, I always remembered this episode of Dharma and Greg, and I actually searched for it when they first became available online to find it. And it's something that when people will look at me very strange, and I'll have shown them, like, remember Nude Rodeo? Her whole logic there of how she got from the clown to Nude Rodeo totally makes sense to me, and that's how I live my life. So I understand why it's really strange for other people to not understand where I come from. So to kind of go back to some of the basic things we always talk about. So I actually started in college anyway as an architecture major. That lasted a semester. I liked houses. I liked especially Victorian houses. I was really good at drafting. So I thought architecture would be a good thing, and that didn't turn out so well. I was miserable. I hated it. So I was fortunate where I went to school. They had a program called Music Engineering Technology. I had started as a performance minor anyway, and so I switched majors and ended up graduating with that, which also required an applied physics electronics minor, in which I won the Up and Smoke Award for blowing the most stuff up in the electronics lab in one semester. As much as I love to solder and tinker and all that, I still get it wrong half the time. I then went on to do my master's work in sociology, and I did that with an emphasis in women and gender studies and research methodologies. And again, to me, this all made total sense. Because one of the things that I was really struggling with in the music engineering industry, so I graduated high school in 91, so I was in college from 91 to 95. I was very used, I grew up a tomboy, almost all boys in my neighborhood, so I was very used to being the only woman in the group. It was something I didn't even notice. Certainly taking drafting classes and all the CAD classes in high school, I was the only woman in the whole shop hallway, as we called it. And I never noticed that. It had no impact on me, so I thought, until it came time to actually start job hunting within the engineering industry. I didn't want to run a recording studio. I was much more interested in some of the synthesis and programming, so kind of pseudo computer science. And man, that was an eye-opening experience. To be what it was like to be one of the very few women in the industry. Even my graduating class, it was a small major, a really hard major, and of 45 of us that graduated the year I did, there were 2 women. And there were none in the 2 years after us. And so I thought, wow, I should understand this a little bit better. So I decided to switch, and I did my master's with emphasis in women and gender studies, and I focused on women working in male-dominated fields. So at that time, there had been a lot of research done on the law and the medical industries, and that was really about it. If you didn't work in one of those 2 industries, there really was no research. So that's what I was looking at. And it required new forms of research methodologies, which was the other emphasis then in my degree. And Forever ABD, for those of you who are at all familiar with PhD programs, you get to a point in your PhD program where all you have to do is write the dissertation. You've done all the coursework, you've done all of the exams, you've done everything else you need to do but write that great big thing. And I had some family issues that happened that required me to take a leave, and I've just never gone back, which is not an uncommon thing. So I will probably forever be all but dissertation as far as my actual PhD goes. If you ever see an academic talk about that, that's all that means, is all but the dissertation. Basically, you just didn't write a book. So this trajectory alone, people are like, how do you go from music to sociology? But it made sense to me at the time. There was a connection. And so then my career. So I had always done some web development work on the side, and when I finished grad school, I ended up teaching. Now, I list all of these. This was at the same institution in 10 years. Now it's our industry. So when I first started, it was multimedia and internet technologies. Then the department got renamed to multimedia and web design. Then we changed names again to interactive media design. Then it became web design and interactive media. That was the name it was when I left 2 years ago. And since I've been at Adobe for the past 2 years, I started as a content community lead in developer documentation for the runtimes. Then I became content and community manager for gaming and Flash runtimes. And then just recently, we had another reorg, and I am now the instructional designer for all of Creative Cloud Learning. The reason I list that is not to sound like some, pompous braggart standing up here. It's the idea that so many of us get wrapped up into what's on our business card. What is our title? The first list there of the different degrees, my job never changed. I mean, yeah, technology came and went in 10 years. You stay current. Certainly we didn't have CSS3 when I first started teaching. But the core of what I did didn't change. But my title did. Let's see. 5 times in 10 years. Wow, talk about an existential crisis if you get too wrapped up in what you do and what you call yourself. When that change is a lot of times outside of your control. Now, that doesn't mean you shouldn't take control. If you're unhappy, by all means, change, right? That quote at the end from Steve Jobs was absolutely spot on. It's fantastic. But you also have to recognize how much doesn't matter. Because when you go back to that, hello, my name is, and you may tell somebody what your job title is, how many people nowadays, especially in anything technology related, actually understand what you do based on your title? Right? And especially in some of the sub-industries, like in gaming, I know somebody whose title is Chief Putter-Outer of Fires. He's a project manager. But Chief Putter-Outer of Fires is just much hipper. Right? So just kind of don't get wrapped up into all of this and see the bigger pictures of where everything is. So looking at this list for me, the thing that is not apparent just by the titles is that teaching and education has always been a part of what I do. As both my content and community lead and content and community manager for Adobe, I was creating educational documentation about our tools and our languages. And now I'm designing, quote, curriculum, to use the term loosely, for all of the Creative Cloud. So education has always been a key part of what I do. All right, but the real reason John asked me to talk was about racing. So I am a licensed race car driver. I race in the Sports Car Club of America. They are one of the bodies here. NASA is the other kind of main kind of amateur thing. Sports Car Club of America also does sanction professional racing. I have a regional license, so that means I can race within the New England region, and then if I want to, like, go say race at a track in Ohio or something like that, I can apply to have my regional license. Basically, it's a limit. I'm not racing against professional drivers who do this every weekend. You know, that's considered a national license. It's much more competitive, much more dangerous to some extent. I race an improved touring Class B, which just basically means they are stock cars. So it's a 1998 Volkswagen Golf. I am good friends with the owner of a team, so there are now 4 different Golfs, very similar to that, for our team, Engine Summer Racing. And that is what I run. So it is a Golf like you would have bought in 1998. The engine is stock. It does have a roll cage, so it has all the safety modifications. So there's no back seat. You know, that's been ripped out. There is a roll cage. There's all the extra fire stuff. Of course, you want a car as light as possible, so you rip out the air conditioner and the radio. And so you look at the dashboard, it's very ugly. It's just empty holes with wires hanging, right? And a big steering wheel. It's got the harness and all of that. But other than that, you know, it has racing brakes. We now have a welded diff on it, a brand new gearbox for this upcoming season. But other than that, it's the Golf that, you know, as my uncle calls it, the grocery getter. You run around town and go get groceries. And I have a hell of a good time doing it. Okay. And I started, when I moved to New England about 16, 17 years ago, my boyfriend, who's always been a huge racing fan, said, oh my gosh, we now live within 3 hours of One Rock Park, Connecticut, which, if anybody knows any of the history of sports car racing in America, that's kind of one of the birthplaces of it. So he's like, oh my God, we have to go. And so we would go to races, and it was fine. You know, beautiful sunny day in the Berkshires, can't complain. It's right on the borderline of wine country in New York, so that would always be that we'd take one day and go to vineyards and one day to go to the races. And for a birthday years ago, there's Skip Barber Racing is actually at the track, and they have all kinds of driving schools where you can spend a couple hours, spend a day, spend a week, whatever, and do various types of both safety driving. They have a really great education program for teenagers. And so I decided to get him for a birthday Christmas present a high-performance driving day. And at the last minute, I decided I was going to do it too. I didn't drive stick, by the way. I could get a manual car from point A to point B, but you probably didn't want to see the clutch after that. And so the requirement for this was you had to be able to drive a manual. So I came back and I'd given him his birthday present. I said, by the way, I'm going to go with you, so you're going to have to teach me how to drive stick. In his 350Z, which he was not very happy about, but he did it. God love him. He did it. He still blames me for the problems with the clutch that he had already put 50,000 miles on. I was like, come on, it's rated for 30. You put 50 on it. Did I really hurt it that bad when you had to replace it? And I had a blast. And it really was. It was a lot of safety defense driving. It was a high-performance day. But one of the things we did was something called an autocross. Anybody know what autocross is? A couple of people. So autocross, you're not on a racetrack. You're basically, the most common places they occur are closed airports. Big, flat concrete. And you set up courses that you're running around the orange cones, right? The construction cones. And the idea is that it's a really small course. It's all about car control. Okay, you never get out of second gear. Your top speed might be 35 or 40, but you are doing, in, say, a minute and a half, you are doing chicanes and hairpins and, you know, 180s and all these different types of things in a very, very cramped space. So it's all about vehicle dynamics and how you control the car. So we had a chance to do it, and it was fun. And then I got to you got to do a ride-along with the professionals doing it. And I got out of the car, I was like, all right, sign me up. How do I do this? And so I decided I was going to get my racing license, and I started working through that. Again, I went back. It was so convenient because Skip Barber is in Connecticut, so 3 hours away. And I went through them, and I did all the licensing and started racing. And I have, so this will be my third or fourth season. So I only get a chance to do maybe 2 or 3 races a summer. So still borderline of rookie-ish. At least I say I'm still rookie because I'm slow. I admit it. And people don't believe me, so this is that, pre-race, right, glamour shot, like the Danica Patrick look, right? This is how you actually look when you get out of a race. And this was on a day that was only like 65 degrees, so you're not even hot, right? Like, this is not a hot day. This was actually my very, very first race. I had just hopped out of the car, just pulled into the pits, just thrown the helmet off, and my dad snapped this because my dad thinks it's very cool that his daughter races, so they came out to watch my first race. So it's really not a glamorous sport at all. I really wish I had, Danica's crew that has got to do her hair and makeup the moment she gets out of the car off of the cameras, because I've never seen her look like me in the pits. I don't know. So, commonly though, I get asked 3 questions when I say, oh, I'm a racer. Okay? And this has taught me a very serious lesson as a professional. The first one is, what's the fastest you've ever gone? Do you have any guesses on how fast I might have gone? Nobody? Well, it's actually hard to say. And anybody who knows what they're talking about with racing, you never look at the speedometer. You're worried about the tach. You're worried about RPMs. You don't care about how fast you're going. You really don't. If you're worried about how fast you're going, you've got somebody with a radar gun on your team who's standing at the side. Because as soon as you start looking down at the speedometer, you're not paying attention to all of the other things that need to be paid attention to. My guess, because I did do something that there was actually a gun that had the display next to the track out at Laguna Seca, and I was doing about 120 down the front straight. And I have people that are up, I do 100 on the Mass Pike all the time. I'm like, yeah, you're dumb. And by the way, at the end of that 120, I had a 180-degree turn. So I went from going 120 miles an hour in 5th gear to 30 miles an hour in 2nd gear in about 50 feet. Now, can you do that on the Pike? I can be a little bitchy. So the second question I get asked most often is, have I ever been in an accident? And I have, sort of. I didn't even necessarily realize it much at the time. In a race, and when they do SCCA races, there are multiple classes on the track at a time. So there's an overall race, and then there's a race within your own class. So I'm ITB, and when I race, there's typically also ITS and ITR. And basically that means we're all improved touring, but the S and the R have souped up engines, they have much more horsepower, they're bigger. And so it works out safely because it spreads everybody out after the first couple of laps. Well, the ITS class, which is the fastest class, had misjudged coming up behind me out of a corner and just smacked right into the back of my car. Now, I'm driving a VW Golf. They're driving, let's just say something a little more expensive that had put carbon fiber on their whole front end. I had a dent that we were able to push out. Their whole front end was destroyed. I was trying to find the video on Facebook because he had an in-car camera of hitting it. I didn't even necessarily, yes, I felt it, and I was like, jackass, and then keep going into the turn, and the race is over. He comes rushing after the race. He comes rushing over to my pit, and is so apologetic, and he's so worried, and he's making sure. And he hit me going 90 miles an hour, and I had no idea. The next morning when I got up and all the harness, because I wear a 5-point harness, I had a 5-point harness imprint for about a week and a half. But it is part of racing. I've been into a wall when my brakes failed going into a corner. I was very fortunate that I was able to slow the car down by downshifting and everything, that it really didn't do much damage, and I didn't get hurt. So I consider myself very lucky. But you do have car-to-car contact. This is not. I'll leave this to the next one. And then the last question I get asked all the time is, so I obviously must love NASCAR, right? Well, so this is the track I started getting my license at, Lime Rock Park. This is considered my home track. This is where I do the majority of my racing. It is 1.53 miles long with 11 turns. This is Laguna Seca, where I finished doing my racing. This is a little bit longer. I think it's 2.5. You can also see that it's 11. That Andretti hairpin is the one where I said you're coming out doing about 120 and you suddenly have to do that hairpin. The corkscrew up at the top, which is actually turns 7 and 8. The 8 fell off of this image for some reason. It literally is, so there's elevation changes in this. So 5 and 6 is actually at the top of a hill. This is just outside of Monterey, California, so it's in the mountains. So you actually go up part of the mountain as you're coming down. And so the corkscrew, the idea is you enter this as you can't see the track because it's starting to go down and you're at the top. And so you aim for the tree on the right and turn, aim for the tree on the left and turn right. Is literally the visual that you have to do. This is the other track I race at in New England, the New Hampshire Motor Speedway. You can see it has a bit of an oval to it, and then it is also, and there's a bowl, so it's a terrible, I couldn't find a good track map. The thing that's labeled up in the upper right says carousel. It is actually a totally banked thing, so that if you don't catch the curve right, you actually spin off into the gravel. But you can see, again, 11 turns in 1.6 miles. That's Daytona. That's Charlotte and Talladega. So I turn left and right. So I think it's fine. I think it's a good thing to get people into loving cars and loving racing, but no, I'm not necessarily a big NASCAR fan. So big deal. Why do I bring up those 3 questions? As a professional, especially now, I mean, as a teacher, you always have to be nice answering questions. But especially now, as a professional that works with the community face-to-face commonly, you know, just like Josh was just saying with answering emails nicely, right? Regardless of where I am, to some extent, I'm a representative of Adobe, and they get really pissy if I say things not so nice. You have to remember that if people are asking you dumb questions, they actually have good intentions, right? The number of times that I've had the, oh, you must love NASCAR, it makes me cringe internally every time. But it's the first time they've asked, because most of the time, it's the first time they've met somebody who actually does race. So be graceful. Also have a good answer, so that on those days when you are tired and it's like they're on your last nerve and you really have no more energy and you've had a really crappy day and not enough coffee and whatever the case may be, you always can answer it gracefully. So have an answer prepared. And remember, they don't hear it all the time. For them, it's their first time asking. It's unfortunate. You're the one hearing it all the time. So related to that, the connection there, so when I say, oh, I work at Adobe, very first question I get asked is, so you can give me Photoshop for free? No, I can't. The second one is, does Adobe really need to update every day? At which point I laugh, because we complain about the same thing. It's like, oh, you come in, you turn on your computer, and you get your coffee while the Adobe updater runs. We do it too. And the last one is, you must be really, really great at Photoshop. And I'm like, I can crop, and I can get rid of red eye. So those are the top 3 questions. And I have to say that when I said today walking to lunch that I worked for Adobe, the first question was not one of these. I was so excited. All right, so the pieces matter. And John has seen the slide. I did a dependency injection talk. So developers, dependency injection frameworks, have an idea of what I'm referring to, right? Everything's uncoupled, blah, 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 blah. So one of the races, my starter went out in my Golf. Getting ready, you're all strapped in, and it takes a while to get into the car, right? We aren't the pros, so I don't have like a whole pit crew and the fast snaps and all that. No, it takes a while to get all buckled in and everything tightened down. And once you are and you're strapped in the Honda, you can't move. You are physically restricted like this. You can't move. It does take a lot of help. I can't get out of the garage. Car won't start. It ran that morning, just fine. Car won't start. So can't figure out what it is. We pop start the car. You get a special variance because when you line up on the grid before you go out, you have to turn your engines off. So we have to apply. They send, so it's 2 guys that own the team and then friends and things that help out. So we had to send somebody ahead to make sure that it was okay as soon as I got to the grid that I didn't kill my engine, because otherwise I wouldn't be able to race. I couldn't get the car started again. So we had to pop start the car, get it back, run the race, get back in the garage, and the inside of the starter is just Shredded. Oh, well, it's a VW. It's a 98 Golf. Guess what? They had 3 more starters in the trunk. Right? The pieces matter, though. That one little piece almost prevented me from running a race. That's not that you get a do-over. Wait, I'm going to... No. They just go without you. But that one little piece taught me how important one little piece is. And it also is actually a really great example for dependency injection. That to kind of have things in your life, whether at work or at home, in the stuff that you're developing, they all matter, and you have to understand their key importance, but to also understand either how to fix them or replace them as fast as possible when you need to. That can sound a little cold, a little kind of unsentimental, and I don't mean it to be, because there's certainly pieces of our lives that can't be replaced regardless, that they're just that important. But in a lot of our lives, we get hung up on the details. We think the pieces are more important than what they actually are. We need to pay them the respect that they're due, but we also need to know, hey, can I replace it? Can I build a new one? And that kind of applies to ourselves, right? Are you that irreplaceable on a project that can't take vacation? Sometimes yes. Yeah, I mean, that's the reality of, especially in our industry. But a lot of times, you know what? I can take a 3-day weekend. I can be off of my email for 48 hours. So the pieces matter, but make sure they matter in an appropriate way. If you're going fast, you're going slow. This is the biggest truism from racing, more than I think almost anything else I can think of right now. If you feel like it happens every time, somebody comes out of the car like, that was such an amazing run, oh my god, I was going so fast, I took that corner, blah, 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 and you're all hyped up and you're like, wow, my times are 10 seconds slower than I've ever done that track before. It's so depressing. The reason for that, if you're going fast, if you feel like you're going fast, you're not thinking enough ahead. When you're driving that fast, you always are looking way beyond where you are physically at that second, because it is milliseconds before you're at that next point. So if it feels like you're going fast, that's because you can't keep up with yourself, and you naturally start to slow down. And think about that in anything else we do, right? You're on a big project, and it just feels like, oh, you're emailing, you've got text, you've got IM, and clients are blah, 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 and you're like, oh, I can't, it's that old commercial, Calgon, take me away. Are you getting anything done? No. Maybe something that not as much as you could be if you kind of take that deep breath and really focus and know exactly where you're going, figure out how you're going to get there, figure out the fastest way to get there, and you're actually going to relax. Things are going to feel like they're moving at a slower pace. You're less likely to make mistakes, which on the track is a big deal. And you're actually going to get a lot more done. You're actually going to be going faster when you feel like you're going slower. And it's the weirdest experience to actually have that feel of speed and know that you were going slower. Or feel that you were going so slow, and you get out and you're like, God, that was terrible. I was just putting around, and you come in, you're like, God, I took 2 seconds off my time. So if you're going fast, you're slow. You can't hear anything. So again, this is from the top of the Doma in Milan, looking down at the plaza. And if anybody's ever been at the top of something tall like that, that's open air, you can't hear the noise from the street. It all just kind of dissipates. You may catch the occasional really loud siren or something, but there's so much wind and it's so far away and it all just kind of dissipates. You can't hear anything. You would be surprised. You can't hear anything when you race. You're in the middle of this huge pack of really loud engines. All you hear is that grumble. That's it. It's constant, low-frequency white noise. If you're in a pack, you can't hear your engine, which goes back to that, you don't know how fast you're going because you have to watch the tach. Right? So many of us are taught to drive manuals by you listen to when you need to shift, right? You hear the engine revs. You can't hear your own engine rev. It gets washed out. You have to rely on other ways to get your data. it's something that really good drivers overcome really quickly. Not so good drivers take a while, and that's a crutch that they always want. They always want to try to hear their engine. They won't race with earphones. I use earplugs if I don't have radio in the car. I just have earplugs because it's really loud. It will do damage to your hearing. They refuse to do that because they want to hear the engine, or they won't have radio feed into their helmet because they want to hear the engine. It's like, you can't. It's a crutch you have to get over. Think about in your own lives, what is that crutch that may be holding you back? Maybe not all the time. Or if there's a problem you're trying to solve, you're looking for data and you're not getting it the way you used to get it, how else can you get that data? So you can't hear the engine, you watch the tach. Well, that's easy. What happens if your tach goes out? There's a lot of, it's hard to tell. You can start watching the oil temperature and the oil pressure. That'll vary a little bit if you know your car really well. I wouldn't be able to do that. The owners of my team can drive without a tach. I would probably... you can hear it when you ping the red line. You can hear that. Trust me. But beyond that, you're kind of driving blind as far as your RPMs if you don't have a tach for a lot of mid-level drivers. But you're also using your whole body in the car. How you feel the back end, the feel of the steering wheel. All of that is input. And so if you're not getting it from one place, you have to very quickly find it from someplace else. Because you can't hear it. Learn the track. So the first thing that you're going to do when you show up for a race, if you're good, after you register, you have to go through tech spec, your car gets weighed, your gear gets all safety checked, blah, 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 blah. You're going to walk the track. And I mean walk it. I don't care if it is Laguna Seca, which is 2-point-something miles that goes up a mountain. You're going to walk the track. Or some will bicycle it, the longer tracks like Le Mans or some of the big tracks in Europe that are 15, 20 miles around. They will ride a bike. Or they'll take like a scooter or something very, very slow. Because the idea is that you have to know every inch of that track. You have to visually have a recognition of what's going on. Because you don't have time to make the decisions to figure out, oh, wait, where was it that I wanted to brake again? No, you need to figure out, there's a bump in the road that corresponds to a little bush. And that bush today has an opening yellow flower on it. As soon as I see that in my periphery, I start to brake. If that's not the right brake point, the next time around the track, I've put that in the back of my mind, and I was like, you know what? That was a little too early. So the next time I see it just behind my periphery, I start to brake. Or maybe I brake less. Or maybe I go further and then I realize I need to brake harder. But you have to have that visual recognition of your surroundings in order to be able to do it. So you have to learn the track. And that's no different if we're building an application or a website or anything. You've got to know what's expected of you. You've got to know the lay of the land. Right? How many times have you heard people tell these stories about how passionate they are and all the hours they spent building an app, only to realize they were the 25th one that week that launched of that same type? They didn't do their homework. That doesn't mean they shouldn't have done it, but that doesn't mean that does mean they shouldn't have put all their eggs in one basket for that one app, unless they had a killer feature that made them better than everybody else. But how do you know that? If you've done your research and you know the track. And that's the same, are you doing feature research? Are you doing market research? Whatever the case it is, you've got to know the area that you're playing in. If you're going to host a dinner party, you've got to know what all the ingredients are before you start cooking. It seems kind of silly, but it happens. All right, know the other drivers. So this one's a little harder, both in racing and in our own everyday lives. There are a group that you learn because you live in the same general area, you all have regional licenses, you run the same type of class, you race each other weekend after weekend after weekend, and you kind of know. So me, I'm still slow. I'm usually mid to early back half of the pack. Most of the guys I race with have been racing since they were 16 and drove stick shifts long before that. I drove a stick shift for 18 months before I got my racing license. I still miss shifts. Especially downshifts, I admit it. I have a lot to learn, and that's part of the reason that I enjoy it so much, is that it's something I'm constantly learning, constantly trying to get better at. They know me. They know my car. They know when I'm in that car. It's part of the reason we have names and we all get to know each other. They know I am going to be slow but deadly accurate through a turn, and that's a good thing. That they know if this is the racing line, I am going to stay on the racing line unless I absolutely get forced off of it. What that allows them to do is to safely pass me. And especially when you're in a situation where there's people in 3 different classes, so kind of 3 different engine powers, you're going to get passed. It's not the end of the world. Like, that is part of racing. You're going to get passed. People need to know how to get around you safely, and you need to know how to not cause an accident if you're going to get passed. Right? There's no blocking. You get thrown out. You get thrown out of a race where I do. Like I said, this isn't NASCAR. This isn't entertainment for TV. This isn't sweeps ratings. This is let's all come home safe. And hopefully our car's in one piece. Very fast, but still. And so you need to know what the other drivers are. There are certain drivers that will bump you intentionally. There's drivers I run against that will occasionally run Grand Am, which is basically NASCAR rules, but in sports cars. They will bump you. Not because they can't get around you, but because they want to, because that's what they're used to racing. And so it's one of those things that I know when you don't necessarily look in your mirrors, but you always have a sense of who's around you. As soon as you see a flash of color that's one of those guys, you know to stay calm. You're probably going to get bumped because that's what they do. And that's kind of what we need to do. Like, we need to know the people we work with. We need to know the people that we live with. We need to know the people that we are in community organizations with. All these different things to try to protect ourselves. And that's kind of a negative thing to say about other people, but they're going to make mistakes. They're also going to do things to help us. And if we have a head start on figuring that out, it makes everything else we do a little bit easier. So I also said I was a musician. I haven't really talked about that much yet. This is my ensemble. I'm actually not in it. I had to sit this particular concert out because I had missed 5 rehearsals with various work travel things. You have to play well with others. So I am one of those people who hate group projects. All throughout school, I would beg the teacher, just let me do it by myself, please. I hate group projects. And as a teacher, it took me a long time until I found a way to actually assign group projects that didn't end up, that to the best I could, would prevent one person from having to do all the work. And the grades would reflect the work that was actually done by the group. But we have to play well with others. We have to be part of a team. And musically, I've been playing for 30 years now. God, yeah, probably close to 30 years. And that is the one continual thing, that regardless of how frustrated I get at work, regardless of on some project outside of work that somebody's let me down and I wish I just would have done it all myself, every Tuesday night at 7:15, I am in a rehearsal room with 45 other musicians. That one person's absence does matter, because that part is not there to be played. And if we don't all cooperate for the 2.5 hours that we are together for rehearsal, and then the concerts we do during the year, it won't go well. It can't. And so that's the weekly reminder of, regardless of how much I may not like working in groups, and how much I know I'm going to end up having to do a lot of heavy lifting when I do work with groups, I have to be able to play well with others, and sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes there is nothing. I've done a lot of solo work as a clarinetist, but there is nothing like being part of the sound that is created by a wind ensemble when there's 45 people blowing through their instruments to create this thing that makes the hall shake. And that's not with amplification. It's an experience that, even if you ever have the chance to sit inside of one, if you're not a musician, you have a friend that is, and can just say, hey, for 20 minutes of rehearsal, can I sit in the middle of the ensemble? So you get that experience. It's something that is well worth. Listen, so sociology. I told you I did research methodology as one of my things with Soc, and it taught me to listen and really pay attention. And this is really key working with software. I have done a lot of the development consulting that I've talked about, and even now in my roles at Adobe, I have spent a lot of time being the one who translates kind of what the customer client wants to the engineers, who speak very different languages. I write a lot of user stories. I help some of the UX people develop personas, because I can listen and figure out, know which questions to ask. know what to follow up with so that I can tease out what's important to tell the actual engineers, to create user stories that are actually valuable. It also helps the research methodology. So I'm out of the Boston office, obviously for Adobe, but I spent most of the week in our San Francisco office doing user testing of some new training materials that we're going to be launching in the near future. So all of that, the research that I used to do and teach when I was in grad school in sociology, it's a lot of the same methods. Yeah, there's specific things for technology and software testing, but in general, it's the same methodology of how do you talk to people, how do you ask questions, how do you write a good survey, how do you just observe people but not let your observation get in their way. And even if you aren't doing research, think about the times where you're at a party. And the best times, at least for me, that I've had at parties is when I've really taken the time to just take a few seconds to kind of listen to everything that's going on. Listen to the conversation that the group I'm standing with at that time is talking about, and really hear what they're saying. It usually changes what I say in response. It's a much more thoughtful, less off the cuff, but it feels much more engaged. It feels much more sincere. And in the end, it's a lot more fun, I think. I said I was a dancer, so I am a Middle Eastern dancer. And these are almost all pictures of various drum solos. So drum solos are part of a traditional Middle Eastern dance where it is just the dancer and the drummer. It is not a choreographed routine. It is all made up on the spot. So it's extemporaneous or ad-lib, whatever you want to talk about it. You don't even know. So typically, the drummer's not playing a song. The drummer is literally just banging away. And you have to pick up the patterns. You have to know. You recognize, it's kind of like the ABCs, so you can eventually sound out new words to read. It's the same thing. You learn the core rhythms, and you have to start picking up on them very fast. You have to listen. But it also makes you find your rhythm, because your rhythm may not be able to physically go. Your whole body can't go as fast as their hands. But you can find a rhythm that matches your body with their hands. It's complementary, and they mesh together. And when that happens, you are dancing to their drums, and they're drumming to your dance. And it's a true exchange. And I think this is what we missed, and this is what I loved earlier when Kirby was talking about kind of being in nature and just kind of finding that, not getting up and checking your email every day, and it was okay to take a 0 day. That's the rhythm we all need to find. And you may need to find, if anybody's a musician, we talk about all these polyrhythms and things like that. It's basically the idea that you're going to have an overall rhythm, and then within that rhythm, you're going to have these little sub-rhythms that are running below it. So maybe this is your overall day of how your day is going and how it's going to work for you. And within that, this is the rhythm you need to keep while you're at work. And this is the rhythm you need to keep when you're with your kids. And this is the rhythm you need to keep when you're with your significant others. Any of the hobbies that you do, while you're playing a game, whatever the case may be, and you need to find how they all fit together. It's kind of like the common denominator when you have to do fractions. You need to find how that common denominator is. Whether you're dancing, whether you're playing, the same thing as with driving. Right? It all kind of ties together. It's all connected. Obviously, I'm not necessarily the first person to come up with this. These are not new ideas. One of the things when I was teaching, I taught the senior portfolio class. Our students getting ready to graduate, going out into the industry. This was a required book I had for them. I think it's one of the most brilliant things. I still reread it about every 18 months or so. It's fantastic. It's one of those things that at least, I don't think it was first done in 2008, I believe is I couldn't remember if it's 2005 or 2008. I looked yesterday too, and I don't remember. And it starts out, hey, you're new in the, you're brand new, you're job hunting, you're just graduating to some extent. And then it goes on through, Keith Fratzy's now, multi-millionaire, successful CEO of this consulting company, on the first name list with all the movers and shakers in, New York, DC, LA, you pick it, he knows them. But how do you maintain that? And it's all about relationships. It can be a part of it as a dry read, but it's really worth your time. And there's different things for every aspect, regardless of where you are in your career. I take away from it, it's always be sincere. Because he's constantly talking about networking. He's like, but you're not one of those network jerks who it's like, how many business cards can I collect? I feel bad at times because I get, on an average week, I probably get 20 to 30 LinkedIn requests. I stopped LinkedIn sending me emails. I try to remember to log in about every 6 weeks and clean out 99% of the requests. Because most of them are, oh, hey, somebody at Adobe, I want to get free Photoshop. And that's a little cynical, but that is actually, I've had people that are like, we've never, in the LinkedIn request, if they put anything at all, it's, I know we've never met and we probably never will, but I use Adobe software all the time, and I was just wondering if you could give me something for free. I've had people actually put that in the LinkedIn request. Okay. That's like the networking jerk. How many business cards can you add to your stack? Who cares? Be sincere when you network. Yeah. This goes back to those 3 questions. That is an attempt at a sincere connection. Oh my gosh, I've never met a race car driver before. How fast do you go? Or do you like NASCAR? Now that's the gazillionth time I've heard it, but for them it's the first. And so be sincere when you ask. What goes around comes around, right? He doesn't quite put it that way, but that's really what it is. If you're a networking jerk to somebody, at some point in your future, somebody's going to be a networking jerk to you, and you're not going to get what you need. And regardless of, yes, there is a lot of meritocracy in what we do in tech, but it's also a lot of who you know. Right? How many times do you get to even know about a call for proposals, right? Because you know somebody there versus it just goes public. So think about that. It never hurts to ask. And this is one of the most powerful stories. He starts at the beginning. A small Pennsylvania manufacturing town, didn't have any money. There was a private school that his dad really wanted him to go to. They couldn't afford to go. His dad walked into the factory manager, so he's just regular shift worker, Joe Blow, time card, factory line guy, walks into the factory president's office one day and says, I would really like my son to go to this school. How can you help me? Now, the factory owner, it's obviously a good story, right? It has a happy ending. The factory owner was so impressed that the guy had the balls to do it that he found a way to help get a scholarship so this kid could go to the private school. And the dad's thought was, what was he going to do? The worst that could happen? He said no. Hearing no is really hard. Failing is really hard. But sometimes the best things come out of that, and you know what? So what? They said no. So it never hurts to ask. And network everywhere. Don't just network at events like this. Right? This is prime. But think about it as making connections. When you're at, for me, rehearsal. When I'm at the track. Oh, heck, the other drivers that have all these businesses, a lot of them are like, they're plumbers or auto mechanics, right? They're small business owners. They needed websites. They didn't know anybody who worked on the web. I got a lot of freelance jobs when I first started racing because you talked about it at the track. Okay? So wherever you are, as long as you're sincere, network wherever you are. And just the 2 last things. So James Burke. So I told you I started as an architecture major, and the only fantastic thing to come out of that whole semester's experience for me was we watched an entire season of James Burke's Connections. If you don't know what this is, find it now. I couldn't decide on episodes, or I would have just played 45 minutes. That would have been my whole presentation. He takes the most disconnected things you can think of and finds how through human history they actually lead one to the other. It is fascinating. The earlier seasons are better than the later seasons. It was a BBC show initially. The Americans kind of did it. It got a little watered down. The earlier seasons are better than the later seasons. Unfortunately, the later ones are a little easier to find, like on DVD. I haven't found them electronically yet, which is part of the reason I didn't show them here. The other thing, which is a little more applicable to us, but the very same idea, is James Essinger's Jacquard's Web. This, to me, was a fascinating read. It's the history of the idea of the computer, of how the loom that Jacquard created, the automated loom in Lyon, France, is what led us to the idea of punch cards and binary programming. like linked how so and so visited this, and the original Watson from IBM, the guy, like visited the looms in France, and it's history, so it's kind of dry at him, but it's actually a whole different way of thinking about how our industry kind of came to be. And so, hopefully, going back to the first picture, they kind of all belong. I intentionally found a picture that they, other than, they're stones, so they're misshapen, and it was hand-carved artisan, so they either none of them belong or they all do. There's not one that stands out. So thanks, and those of you who want to follow me on Twitter, that's me.